y'all, I'm Tracy.
Hey, I'm Reese.
Welcome back to another episode of Haunted Tea Podcast, where we spill the tea about all things paranormal, creepy, and otherworldly. This week, we're taking a dive into things a little less creepy, but not less supernatural. Paranormal pets. We all love our pets. I mean, they're a steady and supportive presence when we feel lonely, and research tells us they can help lower our blood pressure and our stress levels. Since man started walking this earth, they've had animals walking with them. Some become loyal, loving, and devoted pets through domestication, while others remain on the sidelines. Either way, we humans have benefited from their presence as we formed and still to this day form beneficial symbiotic relationships with them.
Hmm.
Pharaohs of Egyptian times went to much trouble and expense to have their pets accompany them into the afterlife for many reasons, including protection, companionship, even as mediators, offerings to the gods and goddesses, or simply to stave off loneliness and accompany them on their journey into the afterlife. I mean, who hasn't used their pet to help with some loneliness?
Absolutely.
The Smithsonian Institute holds ancient Egyptian artifacts that have some amazing carvings. They show prehistoric Egyptian hunters working in tandem with their hunting dogs.
Hmm.
And as special as dogs were to the ancient Egyptians, cats were even more treasured. Even more interestingly, Egyptians mummified and buried a large variety of animals, including, as already mentioned, domesticated dogs and cats to baboons, monkeys, fish, gazelle, birds, especially falcons, which I was not aware of that, lions, mongoose, and hippos.
I didn't know about the hippos.
You didn't know about the hippos?
No, that's my favorite animal. Now I want to go back to being Egyptian.
Now, as long as I've known you, I did not know the hippos were your favorite animal. I had no clue.
That's because I don't have one as a pet yet. When I die, it's going to be because I finally got a hippo and went swimming with it. And just know that I went out doing exactly what I love.
I can see it. I would not be surprised. We'd probably have to have some sort of underwater funeral for you.
And mummify me with my hippo. See, now I have a solution.
That's right. But according to Joshua Mark, he wrote an article in the World History Encyclopedia when I was doing a little bit of researching and information fact finding. And his research tells us that crocodiles were even kept as sacred animals in the temples of the god Sobek. And scholars disagree on whether Egyptians actually worshipped animals as deities, but they're unanimous when it comes to how the people of ancient Egypt felt towards their pets. Domesticated animals were just as popular and deeply loved as pets are in the present day.
Mhm.
So, in the past and currently, of course, we humans may have formed amazing partnerships with our pets, but what about when they amp things up? When they get our pulse rate going and our blood pressure isn't so handled anymore and it's rocketing sky high? What I'm talking about here, Reese, are those moments when normally gentle and fun loving Fido, those moments suddenly turn menacing, scary even, when out of nowhere in some quiet, seemingly peaceful moment, he begins to stare at the wall or the dark space in that just barely open closet door. The air seems to thicken and become much less comfortable. Fido continues to stare and tremble or begins a low growl while his hackles are up, snarling and snapping. And then there's the time you lost your precious baby and you swear by all that's good they've come back to visit you when you hear their collar jingle or the familiar sound of toenails clicking on the kitchen floor. Some even show evidence of unexpected visitors and memories with their pets. You may want to go back and look over your photos and videos and just to check and see if the ones that you have, do they show strange lights or orbs floating? For what reason, we aren't sure, but it's a comfort unlike any other to know they visited or they're still around. I know it is to me.
Yeah.
Have you had any moments like this with your pet? Go ahead, listeners, and post away in our Haunted Tea Podcast Ghostly Gossip group or on our Haunted Tea Podcast page. We'd love to hear about them.
There's this relationship that people have with their animals that's completely unparalleled with anything else in the world. It doesn't matter the species. Animals are forgiving and they're loving and they'll never turn their backs on us if we can only have that total reassurance with all the people in our lives.
No kidding.
But there's also a saying in the paranormal world to trust your pets. Trust the animals in your lives' instincts because many times, if there's some kind of haunting happening in your world or environment, they're going to be keyed in on it long before even the most sensitive of humans are, even if they choose to ignore rather than acknowledge.
Well, I mean, we humans can be kind of slow in that regard. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. We try to turn our backs too.
In many cases, though, trauma, drug addiction, and so on can make us doubt and hesitate or even cut off those instinctive feelings we have and reactions to anything that doesn't fit in our normal daily routine, but not our pets or wild animals either, for that matter.
For sure. When doing the research for this episode, I couldn't find any concrete evidence that animals can actually see spirits or ghosts or anything like that. But a big reason for that is because there's always some skeptic running around saying that ghosts aren't real in the first place.
Hmm.
What the science does confirm is that animals, particularly dogs and cats, have heightened visual and auditory acuity, and it's widely known that they can sense electromagnetic field.
Yeah, just like last week, we were discussing the detection of electrons, wavelength, and frequency of energy. It sure seems to be a pattern of science meeting magic again.
I agree. Our pets have proven able to detect everything from earthquakes to seizures, and wild animals have too. You'll see wild animals flooding out of the forest long before the fire starts or long
Hmm.
before the tsunami hits. They know.
Right, the birds are flying off before the earthquake hits.
Yes, they feel it. And if you think about it, when we're out actively seeking ghosts, a tool that many investigators use, myself included, is an EMF detector, also known as an electromagnetic field detector. So if I'm out in the field and I'm trying to make contact with a spirit and I'm using my K2 or my EMF device, if my dog or my pig starts alerting to a specific area and I walk over and that device lights up like a Christmas tree, I feel like that in itself is pretty concrete evidence that animals can, in fact, detect spirits. Add in my own encounters with my animals and actual proof or not, it's pretty damn compelling that our pets can see things that we can't.
Yeah, damn, Reese. Reminds me of their ability to detect cancer and less than reputable people with bad intentions, too. But even further, I mean, a little further out in the left field, if you will, if you don't mind me digressing, do we trust our dog's instincts when it comes to less ghostly visitors because of the electrical auric field with these living people that they're putting off? And it also makes me wonder, do these pets or wild animals, do they react differently to positive and negative spirits? Can they like can they differentiate between positive and negative ions like we discussed last week? Is all that growling and barking and snarling, the hair up on end, is it only acted out for the negative entities, or is it that they can't really sense positive entities, or I don't know, do they reserve or hold back that behavior for the positive entities?
There's no science to it, but in my experience, they seem to react to the spirit's intentions, very similar to how they react to living people's intentions. I had this dog. I got her the day she was born. She was a wolf dog. I bottle raised her. She traveled the country with me. And she was literally the most timid dog ever. Like if a dog could be a soft-spoken wallflower, that's her. And one day when she was a puppy, I was sitting on my couch and I had a friend over that was also a neighbor. He'd been over at my house every day for months and months and months. And she just lunged across me out of a dead sleep trying to attack him.
Mm.
She knew this guy. It was completely random, totally out of the blue, shocked the hell out of me. And I told the guy he needed to go because I didn't know what was going on with her. Was it medical? Was something going on? Turns out that the guy had decided that day was the day he was planning on trying to rob me. So I don't know what he was going to take because we didn't have anything. We were living in this shitty little like 50-year-old single wide trailer with holes in the floor, but she knew and she wasn't going to let that happen.
That's a hell of an experience. Did he admit later what he was planning, or how'd you find out that was his intentions? There's no way of knowing what else he may have planned either. That's really scary.
I was in my early 20s. This guy was like a late 17, 18, something like that. He was a kid. And I worked with his best friend at the time. And the guy that I worked with said that the guy was like shaken when my friend had gotten off work. He went over to the dude's house and he said the dude was kind of shaken. And he was talking about how Bella had always been his friend before this and she'd never shown aggression. And all of a sudden she was lunging at him, snapping and snarling. If I wasn't sitting there, she would have ripped him to pieces.
Hmm.
And I just happened to be sitting in a position where I could kind of like catch her arm as she lunged. And so my friend's sitting there and he's like, I know this dog. I've known this dog since the day she was born. Is there anything that was changed? Were you wearing a different cologne? And the guy kind of like inadvertently, accidentally admitted what he was planning in a roundabout way. He was young, he was just starting to get into taking pills and doing drugs. And I guess he thought that since I was home alone at the time, he had a shot of finding my stash or something along those lines.
Hmm.
So she knew. She knew that he had ill intentions no matter what they were.
Go Bella.
That dog was something else. When I was living in that house that I've talked about before with the hat man and the shadow people and everything that was happening, it was just me and my kid and my dogs. And Bella was one of those dogs, one of the 3 that I had at the time. And all this terrifying encounters kept happening. And my dogs would look towards the door with their hackles up and they'd start growling before I actually knew that anything was happening. Before the light came on in the hallway, they're looking and they're, kind of deadpanning the door, and then the light would come on. So she was one of the ones who was on high alert too. The other 2 dogs were pit bulls and they were kind of dumb, like sweet but dumb. So I don't know that they would have cued in on it as much as she did if she hadn't been there, or if
Hmm.
they would have like caught on like as I did. But they knew something was happening and they kind of alerted me, and I'd hear the growl and then I'd see something under the doors, a bang or something in the house. But with our house ghost here, Alexander, I've mentioned him briefly. We were fostering this macaw for a period of time, and his cage was in the front room where Alexander liked to hang out. And in the middle of the night, like out of the blue, we'd hear Muttley singing and talking and interacting with somebody.
Muttley was the macaw.
Muttley was a macaw, yeah.
Muttley the macaw. What a cute name.
I don't know if it's like an Australian thing or not. I'll have to ask his mom, but he's a character. We did a couple investigation sessions in that specific room. And what we found, this cage was super big, 6 by 8 or something like that. And Muttley couldn't fly, so we just left the cage open and he could come and go as he pleased. And when we first did the investigation with the SLS camera, we saw Alexander standing right in front of the cage. That was where he liked to hang out, there or like in the
Wow.
corner. So when we do investigations, a lot of times we'll use our EMF detector and say like, hey, light it up for a yes, or we'll use dowsing rods for yes and no answers. And so we asked Alexander, we were like, hey, are you talking to the bird in the middle of the night? And he said yes. And Muttley never screamed or showed any indication of being fearful or upset. And macaws, they have a very big voice when they dislike something. And they had some kind of a friendship or a camaraderie happening.
I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah, and you're right about macaws with their big voices, and it's incredible that him and Alexander had that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about macaws and other parrots, I don't know if you or if our listeners are aware, but they can see on a much higher spectrum than we can. As humans, our eyes contain 3 color receptors, and that lets us see reds, greens, and blues. But a parrot's eye contains 4 color receptors, which lets them see colors well up into the ultraviolet spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And the rods in a parrot's eye also contain an oil that filters out background color, so it helps them see colors with way more intensity. And it makes me realize, you said earlier there's no proof that they can see these entities, that can actually physically see them.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do believe they actually can. And they can see what we can't. And they're not simply sensing what's there.
Mhm.
I think they're actually physically seeing those spirits or energies. And that might also explain why animals only react sometimes and not others, that they can literally see the good and the bad,
Mm-hmm.
which is another area where science and supernatural coexist, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Another way that science and magic exist is they say like your gut instinct.
Mm-hmm.
They say that's based off of a connection between the brain and the enteric nervous system.
Yes.
And it's also based off of fear, of course, but there's a connection. But a very physical reaction to a stressor that our brains pick up on, and it's a true definition of a gut instinct or intuition. And you should never ignore your intuition when it comes to safety. If you have a gut feeling that's specific to your safety in a location, situation, even a disagreement, you should always listen to it. And it may be that subtle voice that prevents you from danger.
Yeah.
In fact, Lakeisha Fleming, she wrote an article for Very Well Mind, which is also going to be in our show notes and resources, discussing intuition. And her premise is that intuition is based off of biology only, and it's caused by physical signs from the body, which you can take and assess.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those symptoms that you might have, some or all of, are having tension in your body or having a gnawing thought that won't go away, feeling like you have a pit in your stomach. Sure, we can all recognize these. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up just before a frightening experience, which also happens within minutes or seconds before being struck by lightning. Ironic, no?
Hmm. Yeah,
You feel like you should avoid a certain area, not knowing why, only to discover you would have been in danger if you had stayed there.
right.
So we can have a gut instinct and we really need to learn to listen to it. I know you and I both believe, Reese, that our pets have a great instinct for these things and can warn us of impending danger. So I think that we need to learn to develop and follow our gut instinct as well as animals do.
Well, and it's a very visceral response. And humans at one point had this. That's how we relied on everything in our worlds. And as we've evolved and come to depend more on technology, we've kind of lost that. So I think that this is a good time because people are starting to get back to our roots. They're starting to see the collapse and commercialism and things like that. And they're starting to rely more on earth magic and herbs and things like that.
Self sustaining measures. Yeah. Yeah, it's time that we get back to the basics. It's so funny because we used to have the basics and we evolved ourselves right out of it into technology. And now we're trying to teach technology to become more human, which I find really interesting.
Terrifying, but interesting. Skeptics can talk all the shit they want, but they can't argue with the ability of many species' heightened senses. And the sixth sense has been somewhat proven to actually be a real thing. It's that sixth sense that's more of the gut instinct or intuition that we talked about earlier.
Right, right, right. Hey, Reese, have you ever tried to contact a former pet using a spirit box or other means of otherworldly communication?
So, funny story, not using paranormal equipment, but we had this horse named Jada. She was a rescued racehorse. She was very senior and very mare. You know anything about horses? She was a stubborn mare.
Diva.
Yeah, it's very much so. And she had the tattoos on the inside of her lips, so we were able to trace down her racing history, and we found out that she had basically been a bad racehorse. She kept kicking her riders, but she was injured
Mm,
pretty early on, and she was put out to pasture to be probably used as like a broodmare for almost 20 years. And then she went to a kill pen and she was rescued by the lady that
mm,
we got her from. That lady had her about 3 or so years. And then when we got Jada, we had her another 3 or so years. So she was almost 30 when we took her in, and she was in pretty bad health. And as bad as her health was, it was a drastic improvement from the conditions that she was in when she was rescued. So we learned that she had some pretty bad arthritis in her spine. She was still a giant pain in the ass. We could hardly catch her. The
mm.
vets hated working with her because she was
Nothing to
such a
hold her back.
yeah, like even medicating her was so difficult, like doing anything to her. Injections for her arthritis, like she was not cooperative in any way, shape, or form. She was a mare, so it was her way or the highway.
Mm.
Sometime towards the end, we got an opportunity to talk to an animal psychic, and she was able to give us insight into how Jada was feeling, and she told us spot on where all of her pain points were, like down to the vertebrae that the
Wow.
injury was. And nobody knew that except us and the vet. This lady, when I talked to her, all she wanted to know was the animal's name and species. That was it. There was no, and Jada was her barn name. That wasn't even her medical document name. So even if she had done research, she wouldn't have known to go for Jada. So the lady was legit. She was able to give us the information that we were seeking at the time to try to move forward with her. And then in August, September of 22, when we started getting ready to move to where we're at now, we were able to catch her. We put her in a round pen to keep her contained for transport. And while she was contained, we went ahead and got her annual vet stuff done, her dental work done. She had some teeth removed. 2 weeks before we were scheduled to roll out and the transporter was supposed to arrive, Jada had an aneurysm and she died in the middle of the night.
Oh, that's sad.
So I hadn't posted about it on social media. I hadn't told anybody except my mom because I was still reeling from the shock of it.
I bet.
Next morning, the psychic called me first thing in the morning and said, "I'm sorry to hear about Jada, but she's not in pain any longer." Like this threw me. There was no possible way that this lady would know that this horse had died like 6 hours before. But apparently what we got from it was Jada didn't hate us as much as we thought she did. She just had some severe trust issues from so many years of abuse, but she wanted to make sure that we knew that she was at peace. So totally mind-blowing.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love that. You know, you mentioned earlier some of the entities that you've encountered and they gave you no concern for worry, that they're simply there and you're only curious about them, but others, they terrified you.
Mhm.
I've had those same reactions. And like I mentioned earlier, I think it's important we listen to our bodies and learn to fine tune our ability to recognize when something's off or could go bad.
Mm.
And I wonder how much Jada realized that something was off during her time in this realm and how much comfort, maybe not knowingly to you guys until she had passed, how much comfort you were able to give Jada. I really think it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm. I have to believe that. And I think we all need to believe that in some form when we lose anybody we love, human or animal.
Right. Well, our pets are far more in tune when it comes to following their instinct than we are. I believe that's why they too react aggressively and sometimes not towards unseen entities. They feel anxious because just like us at much higher ability, of course, they perceive their heart beating faster because they become aware, like we do, as discussed earlier by Lakeisha Fleming. They can tell that the respiration's becoming more frequent and shallow, or because they feel butterflies in their stomach. And instead of overanalyzing those experiences, they react instinctively, never questioning like we do what they're experiencing.
They know to trust their gut. We question it. They know.
Right. What's that one meme or that one saying that I've seen? It's something about a bird doesn't fear the branch that it's sitting upon, it simply takes flight.
I don't know.
It's something like that. And that's what I think of when I think about how they just automatically react.
Mhm.
Because sometimes that's a great thing. Through all of our human evolution, we spend a lot of time overanalyzing and thinking and looking ahead and saying, well, if I do this, then that might happen.
Mhm.
If I do that, I might look silly. If I do this, I might look crazy.
Right.
Maybe we do really need to get back to basics and learn how to be reacting instinctively.
Yeah. Hard to do.
A little less common pet to discuss, but when my then husband at the time was deployed for a year, I made the decision to have Molly come into my life. And y'all might be wondering who Molly was, and she was my baby. I got her as a 2-year-old rhesus macaque, and for those that are aware of and deal with monkeys, getting a almost 2-year-old hormonal rhesus macaque as your very first primate, it was definitely a learning curve. I did not know what the hell I was getting into. But I don't know if you guys remember me talking last week about hearing my then husband come home in the middle of the day and discovering he wasn't there. But this place where I had Molly was also the same place where several paranormal events with my pets happened. And at that time, I was living with my roommate, Virginia, and my then husband, and we had some friends, and they honored me with the decision to make me a godmother to their daughter, Cassie. And at the time, Cassie was around 6 to 8 months old, and I was watching her while her mom and dad were off doing something. I don't even remember what it was. But this little 2-bedroom trailer I was living in had one bedroom at the end of the house and another bedroom at the opposite end. And in the middle was the living room and the kitchen. I'm sure you all can imagine if you've ever been inside an old trailer, it was just like any other old trailer.
Yep.
But if you look to your left or right, there was a bedroom. And as you look towards the larger bedroom, it was separated by a short, narrow hallway. And the lighting was terrible in that hallway, but perfect for shadowy things to hang out, if you know what I mean. Cassie was sitting on my knee, and Molly, my monkey girl, was sitting on the coffee table. And I didn't have the radio or TV playing, it was just quiet. And Cassie and I were basically babbling to each other. And all of a sudden, Molly looked down that hallway at the same time that Cassie did, after which I heard some strange noise coming from what I thought was a bedroom. And just as I started focusing on that noise, Molly started alarm calling and Cassie started basically crying hysterically.
Mm.
And we're all three staring into that hallway. And then, I don't know, I heard some sort of slithering shush sounds,
Mhm.
and that was it. Nothing else happened that night. But I tell you, that old familiar feeling of dread was definitely there.
Hmm. Any idea what that could have been?
I don't know. I did not get any particular feeling at that time of what it was. I just knew it was spooky. and it was dreadful.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I think now about all the things that I've learned, and now, mind you, this was back around 1993.
Mhm.
So it's been a few minutes since then, and I've learned a few things since then.
Yeah.
I really do think maybe it could have been something like a shadow person or jinn or something like that coming in for a visit.
Yeah.
Now, I had another experience that wasn't quite as quick or sedate. I lived in an apartment, and this was before I was married to my husband that was in the Army. He was my boyfriend. I lived with a guy named Chris, and we had this apartment. And my cousin at the time, I think she possibly still is, she was very Christian. Anything to do with magic, anything to do with paranormal, anything to do with anything that had anything different than Christianity was considered evil by her. And one day she unexpectedly stopped by. I really don't know what her motive was, but I suspect it was to come, do an intervention to try to turn me to the right path. And she had this little dog named Scooter. He was black, and I don't remember I know he was part dachshund because he was a low rider. He was real low to the ground. His belly was not unfamiliar with carpet burns, but he was a big boy because he was mixed with something else. It was just giant wiener dog. And she came in and she started talking to me about how I was doing evil things because of my paganism, which I was very polite. I let her have her say. And she started trying to read to me from the Bible. And she actually pricked her finger, which I thought was interesting because, you think of paganism and blood magic and all that. And she had pricked her finger and she was going over to the doorways and using her thumb that she pricked. It wasn't her finger, it was her thumb. She was using her thumb to make blood crosses over the sides and the entrance of each doorway, especially my front door. And her dog had run out, ran back into the apartment. Now, I had this beautiful, sweet, gentle, absolutely love black cat named Chaos. And I guess my cat Chaos took exception to my cousin coming in and anointing all the doorways with the blood of Christ, as she called it. And my cat exploded into action and chased her dog and her from one end of my apartment to the next. And I kid you not, this cat had my cousin shrieking and screaming in fear. And as soon as they would stop, he would stop and stare at her. If she did not stand still and got out of line in his apartment, he would go after her and her dog again. And by the end of it, she and her little dog, too, were perched on the top of my couch with her knees up, cradling her poor little dog Scooter in complete terror over my evil cat. And I just thought that was a little ironic and interesting to add to my paranormal experiences. Whether that was paranormal or just good, plain, clean fun, I can't say, but it was definitely entertaining.
He said, "You're not gonna give the blood of Christ in here. I'm gonna pull the blood out of you."
That's right. He said, I'll take me a piece too.
I wonder what he was sensing. For an animal like that to have an abrupt change in personality and behavior,
Out of nowhere.
yeah, there was something else you couldn't see.
Right. I really don't know. I don't know. Some of these things I can conjecture and I can come up with theories, but I never even came up with an explanation other than he just found it was rude to come in and start spouting Christianity to a pagan household. I I'm not sure.
He said, "We live in a house where they worship cats. What are you doing, lady?"
Maybe he had a little Egyptian in him. The Egyptians treasured their cats.
Oh, I think all cats have that in them. They have never forgotten how the Egyptians revered them, and they want us to all remember it.
Right? You all must bow down to the cat.
So, Nick and I, when we first got together, we were working at an animal hospital. And this hospital I'd worked at before, and then I kind of went off the deep end with drugs and everything. I left. When I got out of rehab, Nick was already working there, and she hired me back.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came back, he was my boss. He was my practice manager. And this doctor, all veterinarians are crazy. I don't care what kind of crazy they are. They all have something that they're just like off. And so this doc, I hope she doesn't listen to this podcast because I still talk to her.
Well, we all have some level of crazy, right? I mean, we all have some level. We just have different crazy.
Doc, if you're listening to this, just know I'm saying all of this out of love. So whenever one of her pets would pass away, she could not cremate them. We had a cat that sat in that clinic freezer from the time before I started working there the first time until she sold the practice and retired. That cat had been in that freezer for like 8 years. And as the practice manager, we had it was in like a supermarket plaza off to the side, and we had 2 units. So one unit was our
Hmm.
grooming and boarding side, and then the other unit was the clinic side, and there was a door that went in between. And there were motion activated cameras all throughout the clinic, on the doors, everything. We had to go in and, turn the alarm off when we came in the mornings, because we did have dogs that would climb out of the kennels at times, and we'd have to go in and contain them before they wreaked too much havoc. So, as the practice manager, if the alarm ever went off for any reason, they weren't calling Doc. She wasn't hauling her ass out of bed and driving 30 minutes to the clinic. It was us hauling our asses out of bed and going to the clinic to meet the safety
Hmm.
officer responding to the call. So, we had this cat in this freezer for years and years and years. Her name was a Black Girl. And it got to a point where our only theory is she was tired of sitting in that freezer. And so things would happen around the clinic. There was one night specifically. You know how when you walk into a vet's office, they've got the big shelf with all of the prescription dog foods and everything on it?
Yeah.
So we had one of those by the door. It was for Hills. And we'd all left. We'd all closed up. We were almost all the way home, which was 15 minutes or so away. And we got a call. It was the alarm company saying, hey, the alarm's going off. So we had to turn around, go back up there. And there was a bag of food on the floor from the top shelf of one of those big metal shelves with all the different prescription foods. And this 8-pound bag of food was on the floor that was off the top shelf. Now, I know for a fact that none of those bags of food were far enough to the edge that they could have fallen. So we pick it up, put it back up there, double check, triple check, make sure that everything is not going to fall, lock it back up, call the alarm company, hey, false alarm, get out of there. We decided to go the opposite way from our house and grab dinner because by then it was, 7 o'clock at night. So we're, I don't know, a mile or 2 down the road. We get another call. Alarm's going off again. Turn around, go back. There's 2 bags of food on the floor. And we're like, what the fuck? So finally, we put the bag up and we're looking. There's no possible way that any of this food could have fallen. So we're like, Black Girl, if this is you, please stop. We just want to eat and go to bed.
That cat was toying with you, even in the afterlife.
She was. Once we asked her to stop, nothing else happened. But we had one of those bells. Every time somebody opened the door, you'd hear like the tinkle of a bell.
Hmm.
And she'd sit up there and she'd make it go off. So we'd drop whatever we were doing in the back and go up front, and nobody's in there, and that door hasn't opened. Look at the cameras, door hasn't opened. The bell's ringing. That cat fucked with us. Finally, we lost one of my monitors. We lost, and we had to send out for cremation. I was like, Doc, please send this cat out with my lizard, please. Like, so my lizard won't be alone. And finally she sent her. I'm just like, oh, thank God. Nothing ever happened there after that.
Yeah, I was going to ask any other events happening, but I guess she moved on.
Yeah. Once she was cremated, she was like, I'm good. Thanks. But for those 8 years, like,
That's
that
great.
would continue to happen. That damn cat. And Doc said that that's how she was in life, too. She was the one that would get on the counter and she'd knock shit down and look at you. So
Well, if it works to get attention, why change? Even in a different realm.
she just like messing with the staff. So, guys, if you're here, we're going to go out on a limb and assume that you have some kind of degree of belief in the paranormal, or at least you want to believe,
Maybe just a little.
maybe just a little bit. We have tons of stories, both of animals coming back to say one last goodbye and of our pets alerting us to the presence of otherworldly entities. When I lose an animal that's close to me, I always cremate everybody unless it's like a horse. So when I lost Bella in August of 2022, she was 15.
Nice long life.
Yeah, it was. Towards the end, she started to have a degenerative neuropathy that, even with medications, it wasn't treating it the way that it needed to. And I think I let it go on longer than it should have. But, I couldn't let go. But she had a very distinctive gait because of her back end, the way it was going out, and neuropathy that she was facing. So shortly after she passed, I heard one of the dogs walking around next to my side of the bed, and I look up and I'm looking to see who it is, and there's nobody there. And then I close my eyes and I'm going back to sleep, and I hear it, and I'm like, Bella, lay down. And it took me a couple seconds of, wait, she's not here anymore.
Right? Wait a minute.
But when she did pass, I had the cremation company make a nose print and a paw print out of ink. So I went to my tattoo artist
Mhm.
and I had her mix some of the ashes in the ink.
Aw.
So when I went to get her nose and paw print tattooed, I always have a piece of her with me now. And that helped me. I needed that to heal.
Yeah.
So there was another instance. The last house that we lived at in Florida was it was a 2-acre property, and there was a 6-foot perimeter fence that went all the way around. Couldn't get to the house without going through that fence. We had a gate at the beginning. It was really difficult for anything to get in or out, and it's because we had a lot of free range animals. We had the horses, we had goats, we had cows, we had chickens, we had turkeys, we had pigs, plus all of our exotics. And we weren't in a great neighborhood, so we wanted to make sure that we didn't have crackheads scaling the fence.
Mhm.
So we always kept the gate locked. House is in the middle of the property, and behind the house, I have a wash station for all of the bowls and everything. So I was out there one night. It was late at night, and one of our dogs, we still have her. Her name is Sky. She's like this beagle mix, but she chases everything. And she always messed with my rabbits. She always messed with any small animals that we had at the time. We were rehabbers, so we had squirrels and baby bunnies and things like that. That dog could not leave them alone. And so I'm out there one night, and it's probably 11 o'clock at night. And this property, it was second to the end of the street, and the house on the corner, the guy had bought the property back in the 50s. He built his entire house by hand, and it was almost like the Winchester house because he added on to it over the years.
That house fascinates me.
That's exactly, and we looked at buying it, but it didn't even have a roof. It needed so much work, so we decided not to.
Mhm.
But the guy was a hoarder, and he was also a professional diver his entire life. So he wound up building the house itself was like 5,000 square feet. He built another 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house on his property behind the main house, and everything, like top to bottom,
Mhm.
floor to ceiling, full of relics and artifacts and things that he had found while diving. So the little house he literally built into a museum. He had glass display shelves.
Oh, wow. I'd love to see that.
Oh my god, it was amazing. And he he was this little old man. He lived by himself. His wife had passed 10 years before. And so when we first moved in, we got our horse there before we started living there. And so we come over after work one day. We're in the process of painting and moving and everything else. And the guy's sitting in a lawn chair along the side of the fence talking to the horse. And he was like, listen, he's a lonely old man. I'm a lonely old man. So we're just going to hang out here together and keep each other company. So when we started building our exotic enclosures, most of them we built on his side of the fence. And he would take his little chair out there and he'd go and he'd sit and talk to everybody and he'd walk back and forth and ask about all the animals. And then back then we were still giving like tours and stuff. So whenever we would have a group of people over for a wildlife tour, he's inviting them next door to go look at his museum. And it's like, dude, you need to go. It's cool stuff. So he was a trip. He wound up passing away in, I want to say, June or July of 2019. And we had never been in his house while he was alive. It took his kids over a year to get everything cleared out enough that we could do a walkthrough of the big house to see if we were going to buy it or not. We'd been in the museum, but he also had a 2-car garage that he had converted to a workshop that was full floor to ceiling of antique tools. I don't think he would have considered himself a hoarder. He would have called himself a collector.
Mhm.
When he passed away, that's when we found out that the guy's wife had died on the property. The guy's mom had died on the property. One of the guy's sons had died on the property, and his brother hung himself on the property.
You got lots and lots of energy built up there.
Lots of energy. Then they went on to say that the son, one of the living sons, was one of the original owners of our house because his dad had owned our property too, and he gifted that to his son for his son to build his first house. So whether Some of the deaths happened on his property or our property. We don't know for sure because there wasn't a fence or a divide or anything at that point. So there was a lot of energy. And after he passed, I saw a lot of shadow people always on his side. I'd be out by like the Cody's and I'd look over the fence and I'd see somebody walking behind, one of those big dumpsters that they have. And I just see them walking and then they just disappear. So I figured if they weren't coming on our property, it was fine. They weren't messing with me. So, whatever you want to do. So the only enclosures that we didn't have on his side of the fence was our fox and raccoon enclosure was built onto the back of our house. So if we were standing at our back door and looking towards our back fence, all of the enclosures were all on the left side. And the fox and raccoon, Wookie and Fidget, were built onto the back porch on the right side to where like anybody that was staying in our guest room could look out the window and look straight into their enclosure. It was really cool. So the well house was to the left of the back patio, and it was pretty close to where all the animal enclosures were. There was also an outside toilet there. That's a whole nother story. But so my wash station was right next to the well house. So I'm washing bowls, and I'm maybe 20 feet away from the back door. And this fox is my heart. For anybody that's ever had a relationship with a fox, they are very much one-person animals, and that is it. He won't even let Nick come near him. And we've had this fox since he was 3 weeks old. We've raised him. But he's my baby, and I trust him. And out of the blue, Wookie just starts screaming. And this is a scream that I have never heard come out of any fox's mouth. We've had dozens of various species, never heard this scream before. And going wild, and he's throwing himself into the side of the enclosure, and Fidget's kind of like going back and forth.
God, I've heard foxes scream, and it's not pretty. It's pretty chilling.
Oh, yeah, and we didn't have, I don't think we had an Arctic fox at the time, but we didn't have all the reds that we wound up having. But he's just losing his mind. And I've never heard him make this sound before. I've never seen him act like this before. And then I see something white streak across from the front yard, like parallel. It goes from the front right corner all the way across the yard, 2 acres, to the back left corner. And I see it run past me, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And I thought it was Sky chasing a rabbit. So I'm running out there, and I see him run into this back corner behind my pig pen. And I'm running out there barefoot, like screaming, like, I'm going to kill you, because I thought she was going after one of our animals. And Wookie is still just losing his mind, throwing a fit. And Nick comes to the back door, and he opens the glass door, and he's like, what are you yelling at? It's like, I'm going to kill this fucking dog. She's going after something. He's like, all the dogs are inside. I'm like, well, what did I just say?
And you're like,
I just saw something. And so he gets the flashlight and brings me a pair of shoes, and we're walking through the yard, and we're searching. The way that yard was set up and the direction that it went, there was nowhere that it could have hidden. There was nowhere. We had to be very vigilant with FWC and USDA regulations that there were no possible ways to exit under the fence. There were no holes. There were dig guards everywhere. And if anything had climbed it, I would have either seen it or heard it on the chain link. This thing was dog size, and it was just this white streak. So we tore that yard apart. We looked the whole night, couldn't find anything. Finally, Nick's like, you're crazy. It's a unicorn.
This is what you were talking about. Okay.
And I'd bring it up later, and I'd be like, I wonder what I saw in the yard. And he's like, it's a unicorn. And I was like, no, I saw something. Wookie saw something. Wookie saw it first. He still makes fun of me to this day. I still don't know what it is.
I'm getting you a t-shirt. I'm going to have you a t-shirt made with a white unicorn on it. I swear. By all that's holy.
And it's got to have a picture of But, this fox, when we started our rescue, he was before the rescue. So he had interacted with every animal that we had on that property. There was nothing that he was afraid of. There was nothing that bothered him. So if it was a dog, if it was a cat, if it was a horse, if it was a goat, if it was a pig, any type of animal, it wouldn't have fazed him. Nothing fazed him. So whatever this was, it was fast and it was silent. But I mean, he saw it first. And that's what made me think, because I was thinking that I was crazy. So we still, to this day, no idea what it was. But if I hear him screaming, even
you
now,
look for that unicorn.
I check it out.
I was just thinking it's amazing how many experiences that our listeners have had, that you and I have had. So many people have had these paranormal experiences, and so many skeptics out there think that they can poo-poo them. I hate that expression, but it's so apt.
So we found some ghost animal stories from famous people. Actually, if you look, there's hundreds and hundreds of encounter stories with people either having a ghost pet or their pets alerting them to the paranormal. But for time's sake, we're only going to read one that we found. And we've had a couple listener stories that have been submitted. There is one story from Christopher Knight. He was Peter Brady of the original Brady Bunch TV show. And he tells this strange tale while they were filming a ghost episode of the Brady Bunch. The cast was staying at a creepy bed and breakfast type place, and they stayed up late telling ghost stories to each other before finally going to sleep. According to him, he woke up in the middle of the night to find two hunting dogs sitting at the foot of his bed staring at him. Then he saw a little girl staring at him from the doorway. Neither the dogs nor the girl made a sound. The next day, when he started telling everybody his strange encounters, the bed and breakfast owner took him to a fireplace, and there was a painting of two hunting dogs on the metal fire guard of the old house's fireplace, and they were the exact same dogs that he saw. Nobody knows if the decorations were actually inspired by two real dogs who once lived in the house, but it's said that this experience left him shaken.
I bet he was shaking in his boots.
I would be.
Hmm. Well, we also have some listeners that sent in stories to add to Mr. Brady Bunches.
I'm excited. I haven't read all of these because I knew you were going to, and I wanted to have the experience of being a listener.
That's right. That makes it fun. Being friends with several of these people and them being our listeners, I was both surprised and extra thankful that they took the time and effort to write in and provide their stories and experiences for us to listen to. I hope that y'all find them just as valuable and interesting as I have. Dawn Facemeyer, she's one of our loyal subscribers. She provided on our podcast page, I lost my sweet baby Gizmo last year. She looked like a little doll. She was 2 years old and only 4.5 pounds of pure attitude. I loved her quirkiness and that tiny button nose. Dawn went on to say that even to this day, sometimes I feel her snuggle in the crook of my neck like she used to do every morning. I miss her so much. Rest in peace, my sweet girl. Dawn, I love Gizmo too, and I didn't even get to meet her. We would love to get more pictures of her that you would post up for us to look at.
That just shows the bond that people and their animals have when they're willing to come back and get in that place of comfort.
It's so true. There's nothing like it.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for your loss, Dawn.
So we have another listener. Her name's Amy Graff Salem, and she wrote in, nothing has happened since this time 2 years ago, right before my little Miss Fluff and Stuff passed away. She was my service dog. She'd stand on the couch and look down the hallway and bark with her hackles up. She was on the way out before she passed. Sometimes she would not go down that hall no matter how hard I tried to get her to go. But this thing was in my living room and it let out an insane growl. It freaked me out. I seriously thought Charlie was messing with Boogie. He came in and asked what in the world Boogie was barking at. I've seen the old ghost walking around the house, but mainly in the back down the hall. This house was built back in the 80s when the original house burned down. The original was built in 1845. That's a lot of history there, Amy. And we still have some of the original limestone foundation blocks under this one. I believe the old ghost is the one from the cemetery that Christine brought home that night. The only time I've seen Boogie do anything like this was right after my daughter passed, but he was glad to see that spirit. It felt like she was in the room with us. He did not bark, but sat there like he was being petted by someone. His tail was wagging and he was looking up. I'm serious, that bark that Boogie was doing was a protective bark like something was out there to hurt me. I'm still freaked out. And Amy went on to our page just today, again, Wednesday the 24th, and added a new experience. Remember what Reese and I were talking about when you focus on the spirits, how you can expect them to look back and pay more attention and become more intensified? Amy said, yesterday was totally weird. It started off when out of the blue, the wiggle waggle giggle ball, say that 5 times fast, I have hidden away in one of the pie safes, dropped out of it. You had to pull hard on that door to even open it. We were all sitting and not moving when it came flying out. Then later in the afternoon, Boogie started barking like someone was suddenly here. Charlie was outside, and I was sitting in the recliner with Boogie when he went postal. I got up to see what Charlie was doing for him to be this upset. When I turned my back on Boogie, he started growling and barking, and something growled back. Ever since Charlie's daughter went to an old graveyard back in the 90s and came home with handprints burnt onto the trunk of her car, we have had something malevolent come by for visits. I have a cross of some kind hung up in every room of the house, and he has stayed away. I think he has come back. The lights have not been flashing on and off like they did before, but I'm not happy with him harassing my little dog. For our listeners, you guys, there are going to be pictures of Boogie and Miss Fluffin stuff under the show notes and resources and on Patreon. And we also had Dawn post some pictures of her cute little gizmo. Our next story is by Terry McCorkle Teague, and she submitted this. Now, let me give you a backstory. Terry has 3 little tamarins, and those are small monkeys. One is a cotton top, and 2 are red-handed tamarins. She lost 2 of her other babies, and that's who she's referring to here. She still has 3, but she lost 2. And it says, I never really thought about being visited by one of my babies after their death before until a friend mentioned in one of my videos I shared that she could see a light, which she called an orb, with the babies. I went back and looked, and there it was, floating around another of my very sick babies. At first, I was kind of at ease about it, her watching over him. Then he became sicker and sicker, and I became very nervous that she was coming to take him away from me. After months, that dreaded day came, and he did pass. The following night and a few days after, there were 2 orbs floating around the other 3 in several videos and even in a few pictures. I was so afraid that you would take my others from me. I was so emotional about this and then realized if it was meant to be, it would be. I just tried my best to think as positively as I could, not letting any negativity come into my mind about it. Days and weeks passed and no one got sick. It's been 3 months now, and I see the orbs less and less. I now believe they were telling me they were together and happy, or at least that's what I want to believe. Well, Terry, I believe that. Looking over there, Mama.
That's amazing. I don't believe that pets coming back to visit is limited just to the humans in their lives. I do think that animals have incredible bonds, even intraspecies bonds that I've witnessed. That's amazing. So it makes sense that if they're going to come back, they're going to check on everybody, not just mom, but the brothers and sisters as well.
I believe it right with you. I do believe they're together and happy. So we had another listener that she sent in this story, and this is about her dog, Nicholas. She said, I needed a big name for him. Such a huge personality. He would have been 17 this year and was born on 6/21 of '07. We didn't get him until December. He was slow growing in the runt. The vet's wife was the breeder, so I knew his whole story. So one December day, we stopped at the grocery store, not our usual one. As a matter of fact, I don't think we'd been there before nor since. The pet store is in the same shopping strip. The store belonged to the breeder, and I told Joe I wanted to go in to see if they had pretty collars for our hobby girl. At the back of the store, they had dun 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 puppies. So I looked at all, and his kennel was being cleaned, and he was walking around on the floor, and I said, how cute. The lady told me to hold him so he wouldn't be underfoot while she cleaned. Arlette, that was your biggest mistake right there. That was when that's when it was destined to happen.
That right there is what we call a God shot.
I held him and took him to a room. They have to allow potential fur parents interact with the little foot critters. Joe found me there. Joe's her husband. On the floor, playing with him, he laughed and said, your favorite breed of little dog. We weren't thinking or planning to get another dog. And I remember I said, oh no, Hobby would be so mad. He looked at me and said, look how he's looking at you. I had noticed, but didn't want to say anything. He told me to think about it. I handed him back to the lady, and he was fighting to stay in my arms. So I walked around the store with him, telling him we already had a pup, and I didn't think she would like another doggie. He paid close attention to my words. It was so eerie, like he knew me. So I decided to buy him a harness and asked the ladies at the store to give it to whoever got him. He was crying as I left. Joe and I came back home and I already missed him. I asked Hobby how she'd like to have a brother. I made sure she knew it wasn't another girl. I called the store and said, "Hold him for me, I'm driving now." They told me they had him at the register because he would not stop crying. When I got there, he was at the register wearing his harness. They told me he stopped crying as soon as they put it on him. So I held him and walked around to get a leash, a sweater, and the food he was being fed. We drove back home listening to music and me telling him everything about Hobby. It took a bit for her to accept him. She would jump 5 feet in the air any time he tried to get close. He was by far the most difficult dog to potty train, and I have had dogs since I was a month old, but we never gave up. I took a week vacation to stay home and train the little demon. She took maternity leave.
Pup paternity leave.
Then I would drive back home every day at lunchtime to let him out. And finally, he decided to learn. Stubborn little boy. Super smart. Learned everything in no time. All the commands to walk on a leash. So we knew he was being stubborn. And he got his match because I am stubborn. And by God, I was going to win. Took Hobby like a week to finally accept him, though. She rolled him on the grass outside and figured out he was a boy. He was such a joy, always happy, always near me. I remember one evening I was cooking and had a few small pieces of chicken to give him. Hobbs was next to me, and I started to call his name, and my son said, "Mom, he's always right behind you." I started to pay attention, and sure enough, he was always behind me, my little shadow. 2 years later, we got him a little sister just like him. He loved her so, so much, but still loved Mama more. We had such a wonderful life together. He was funny, spunky, loving, loved going bye-bye, enjoyed being bathed and having his hair brushed. I would sit on the couch with him and could brush his hair all night long, and he loved it. I'd rather not remember the day I had to say goodbye to him. He fought to live, and I told him I would fight alongside him, but if he ever got tired, that it was okay to go. I would never allow any of my babies to suffer, but that decision was hard as my very first dog. But like I always told him, I love you best. And so it was time to show him that I indeed loved him best. We went and had a puppuccino. Well, he did. I got me a coffee. Sat there in the parking lot, smoked a cigarette, listening to our song, and then went to the vet. Arlette, you did the right thing at the right time. He crossed the Rainbow Bridge December 21 of 2020. I still hear him, his little nails on the wooden floor. If I fall asleep on the couch, sometimes I feel him against my belly, where he would take naps with me whenever I wasn't feeling good. Only once caught a glimpse of him. His happy eyes, his happy tail that only wagged for me, and then he was gone. I still look anyway, but I truly hope that his sweet soul is having fun, playing with Hobbs and telling Flash Mama loves me best. He was so attuned to me. I don't know why he reminded me of Flash, my first dog. He was a month older than me, and he took it upon himself to be my protector. I learned to walk with him. That's a story for another time, though. But Nicky, to me, it always seemed like I knew him, he knew me. I pray his soul is having fun. I don't want to be selfish and keep him tied to this plane. I'd love to see him again and again. I do feel his presence, and I do hear his little nails walking around. Is it luck that your loved ones come to show you they're okay? I like to think so. I was finishing giving a bath to Victoria, Nikki's little sister, where he loved to be pampered. She hates it to this day, though. And so I was telling her why she couldn't be more like Nikki and enjoy all the pampering. Would you believe me if I told you I felt a brush of fur on my ankle? I looked down like, what the fuck? And there he was. Not translucent like some imaging ghost, but a different quality, like when I don't have my glasses on. I can't explain it any better. That smile in his eyes, that little tail wagging. But I know it was real because Victoria stopped fussing and tried to get over the sink looking down, and just like that, he was gone. You guys, Nikki's picture will also be in the resources and Patreon if you want to get a good look at Nikki. And I think we owe it to all of our owners that have written in to include pictures of their babies as a sort of memorial as well.
Yeah, I do. I have a couple thoughts on this. When when spirits materialize, they say it takes a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're seeing a full bodied apparition, it's often thought that they have to draw the heat out of the air or energy from electric devices.
Electrons.
hmm With animals, I truly think we feel them. We'll feel them brush up against us.
Right.
But for her to actually see him, I feel like that speaks to the just happy, positive energy of who this dog is.
The volumes of love he had for her and still has for her.
Absolutely. I believe in traveling souls. And I don't think that traveling souls have to be the same embodiments every life.
Mm-hmm.
What could be my soulmate in this life doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same in the next life. And it could be my husband in this life and he could be my cat in the next life. Things like that.
Right.
I believe that there are animals in our lives that are also traveling souls. I believe that with my Wookiee. I believe that with Bella.
There are soulmates.
Absolutely. And I feel like when we look at that animal and we know that we've seen them before and we know that we've lived with them before, that when we do have to say goodbye, it's temporary.
So much agree.
And we're always going to see them again in every life.
The big thing I wonder is that I'm really hoping for is that there is some sort of clear memory when we make these transitions. That it doesn't have to be a completely new meaning every time.
I don't know if it's memory, but we know. We know.
Mm-hmm.
You knew when you looked at Justine that you knew her before.
Oh, I had to.
And I think in our next life, we'll still feel the same way. And it could be looking at your daughter and saying, I know you from somewhere, or any other number of infinite possibilities. But I think that we do. We have our tribe and we travel with them and we materialize. And sometimes we get lucky and we get that spirit twice in one lifetime.
Right. And we get to call them soul family.
Right. One dog might be reincarnated into a cat that's your soul cat. And you're like, damn, you're so much like this dog. And it could be the same soul.
Yes, and I do not believe that it has to be linear.
Mm-mm. No, I don't think it is.
I believe that there's no time limit. At any rate, I really enjoyed working on this episode, interacting with our listeners and hearing their stories and telling my story and hearing their stories. Again, some of them we see.
Yeah, it's amazing the engagement and the interaction. And it's another way that animals bring people together. We've had more engagement talking about this post than any others. And it speaks to the love and the emotional ties that people have to their animals.
Very much so. We would really like to thank you guys for once again tuning in. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for your loyal listenership. Yep, that's a made up word, but we can do that here.
Our podcast, our rules.
Right, exactly. I think our listeners will be okay with that. I think we can all agree there's a whole other unseen, inexplicable world of paranormal, supernatural spookiness out there. And in my opinion, our pets are far more intuitive and sensitive to that world than any of us combined.
Yeah.
We've seen that in our coverage of ancient cultures and paranormal experiences, as well as modern cultures, to this very day in our listener stories and their paranormal pet experiences, as well as ours.
We can't thank you guys enough for tuning in, for hanging out with us for another episode. We are on Patreon. It's patreon.com/haunted tea podcast. We post all of our episodes on there. And for our paid tier members, you get extra bonus features, behind the scenes stuff. We have a Facebook page, Haunted Tea Podcast, that covers more of like the business type stuff. And then we've got the group, Haunted Tea Podcast Ghostly Gossip, where you can go in, you can post pictures, you can speak with other listeners, you can tell your stories. We're trying to foster a safe, welcoming environment where nobody feels like they're being ostracized or where your experiences are questioned. We are now on YouTube as well, and all of our episodes are available on there for free. Don't forget, if you like what you heard tonight, please hit that follow button. That helps us with the Spotify algorithm gods. If you like what you hear, rate and review us, and we will see you guys next week. Stay spooky, y'all. Bye.